On a soft March morning in Edgewood Springs, Eli Turner adjusted the beams of his greenhouse while robins chirped nearby, blissfully unaware of the suburban storm about to roll in. The dew still clung to the grass, catching light like bits of crushed glass beneath his boots. Eli exhaled slowly, straightening his back and brushing his palms against his worn jeans. The frame was almost done, just 2 more panels and it would be ready to hold heat and promise. He tapped the end of his tape measure with a rhythm he'd picked up from his grandfather, who used to whistle hymns while hammering slats together with hands calloused by time and weather. A breeze came through the pines, soft enough to lift the edge of the tarp he'd left folded near the compost barrel. Somewhere to his left, a cardinal announced its territory. And then, the gate creaked. It was a familiar sound, but not a welcome one. The old hinge always groaned like that when it swung open, the kind of sound that had once sent Eli scrambling as a child when he'd forgotten to finish chores. His grandfather's voice echoed in his head like it always did when that gate moved without warning. That sound means trouble's coming. Eli turned. She was already halfway across the gravel. Karen Bellwood, crowned in floral lavender and indignation, was approaching like a thundercloud wearing heels. Her handbag bounced with every sharp step, and her sunglasses gleamed with accusation. Eli stayed where he was, his hands lightly resting on the rim of the raised planter. "Mr. Turner," she said, not slowing her pace. "We need to talk." "Mornin', Ms. Bellwood," Eli replied, voice measured. "You look like you've been walking with purpose." Karen stopped 2 feet from the greenhouse foundation, her gaze sweeping over the exposed beams and glass sheets. "This structure violates at least 3 neighborhood ordinances. I wasn't aware the HOA's authority extended past the eastern fence line," Eli said, brushing dust from his palms. "It's a matter of neighborhood aesthetics. This," she gestured broadly, "is an eyesore." Eli took his time in responding. "It's a greenhouse, on farmland that's been in my family for 3 generations. Karen's nose crinkled as though the word, farmland, offended her sense of order. "And yet it backs directly onto Rosehill Estates, where residents expect tranquility and tasteful design. I reckon vegetables won't offend anyone's sense of taste." "This is not a joke, Mr. Turner." Karen's voice sharpened, her tone slicing through the calm like a paring knife. "That structure is too tall, too reflective, and frankly, too visible. I'm within zoning regulations." "We'll see about that," she snapped. "There are rules." Eli tilted his head slightly, watching the way her hands gripped her bag. "There's also property law." Karen exhaled hard through her nose. "You're disrupting the harmony of our neighborhood. If you don't remove this by the end of the week, I'll be forced to escalate." "Escalate to what, exactly?" Karen's hand darted into her purse and emerged with a phone. "I'm calling the sheriff." "Right now?" "Yes, right now. We've had complaints." Eli glanced around. There was no one else in sight, save for a breeze nudging a chime somewhere down the fence line. "Funny, I've just heard birds." Karen ignored him and raised the phone to her ear, turning her back to the greenhouse like a prosecutor presenting a case. Across the gravel, Nancy opened her screen door with a creak that rivaled the old gates. She stood for a moment, surveying the scene with her mug held steady in both hands. Karen's voice rose in volume. "Yes, I'd like to report unauthorized construction and a potential community safety concern. There's a structure being erected right on the edge of Rosehill Estates. No permit is visible." Nancy stepped off her porch and ambled toward Eli, her gait slow but confident. She wore a long sweater the color of oatmeal and carried a foil-covered plate in one hand. "Banana bread," she said, handing it off like a peace offering. "Looks like you're gonna need a little comfort." "Appreciate that, Nancy," Eli said, watching Karen pace near the fence like a dog circling its own shadow. "She's started on you now, huh?" Nancy muttered, eyes squinting beneath the rim of her visor. "Poor thing. Thinks authority lives in her driveway." Karen's voice rang out again. "Yes, I'm looking at it right now. He's standing there as if this is all perfectly normal." Nancy leaned closer to Eli. "It is perfectly normal," she whispered, "that's the sad part." Eli offered a small chuckle and peeled back the foil. The banana bread was still warm. He took a bite, the cinnamon and walnut notes softening the tension that clung to the morning. Karen continued talking in clipped, performative syllables. Eli chewed slowly, deliberately. The call dragged on another minute, and Nancy made her way back to her porch. Karen finally hung up, triumphant, and stood with her arms crossed. "There," she said, "you'll be hearing from the sheriff shortly." Eli nodded. "I'm sure I will." From down the road, a low hum started up, one familiar to anyone in Edgewood Springs. It was the unmistakable rumble of Sheriff Dalton's cruiser coming down the gravel. As the call ends, a sheriff's cruiser turns onto Eli's gravel road. "Mr. Turner," Sheriff Dalton said as he stepped from his cruiser, "what's this I hear about your greenhouse terrorizing the suburbs?" Eli set down the banana bread and wiped his hands on the side of his jeans, trying not to smile. Karen stood a few yards back, arms folded like she was waiting for applause. Her heels had sunk slightly into the soft ground, but she held her chin high, as if even the earth dared not inconvenience her. "Morning, Sheriff," Eli said with a nod. "Didn't expect company so early." "Well," Dalton replied, surveying the scene with practiced eyes, "I got a call about unauthorized structures, public disturbance, and, my personal favorite, moral decay by way of tomatoes." From a few porches down, curtains shifted as curious eyes peered out. Two kids on bikes had stopped at the end of the gravel drive, watching quietly, the way children do when adults start speaking in clipped tones. Karen stepped forward, hand still gripping her phone like it was a legal badge. "Sheriff, this man is clearly violating our neighborhood's tranquility. That greenhouse is an eyesore and a hazard." Dalton raised one brow. "Is it now? It's offensive, and noisy, and it reflects sunlight directly into my breakfast nook." Eli said nothing. He simply motioned with his hand, palm upward, as if offering the greenhouse for inspection. Dalton walked a slow arc around the half-completed structure. He stopped, tapped the metal frame once, then turned back toward Karen. "Well, Ms. Bellwood," he said, his voice even, "far as I can see, it's not on your property. And it doesn't appear to be violating any laws. No smoke, no fumes, no music, no lights. Just a man working on his own land." Karen's lips parted, but no words came out for a moment. She regrouped quickly. "That's not the point. He's disrupting the character of our community." "The HOA's jurisdiction ends at the property line," Dalton said, brushing something from his jacket sleeve. "And this greenhouse? It's firmly on Mr. Turner's land. That doesn't mean he can just do whatever he wants." Dalton looked at her for a long second. "Actually, it sort of does." Karen's face flushed. She turned abruptly and muttered something about speaking with attorneys, her heels digging furrows in the soft dirt as she stormed off toward the WA gate. The kids on bikes looked disappointed that the show was over. Dalton adjusted his belt, then turned to Eli. "You always cause this much drama on a Tuesday?" Eli chuckled. "Just trying to grow some greens." Dalton smiled. "I'd recommend marigolds near the door. Keeps bugs down." The sheriff turned to leave, then paused. "I'm heading over to Morning Porch for a biscuit. You need anything?" "I'm good," Eli said. "But thanks." Dalton gave a nod and climbed back into his cruiser. The tires kicked up a little dust as he drove off, his window down, radio humming something faint and old. By the time Eli returned to his tools, the breeze had picked up again. He bent over to pick up a dropped wrench and paused as something flickered near his porch. An envelope, large, glossy, WA letterhead. It sat perfectly centered on the welcome mat like a dare. He reached down and picked it up. Back inside, the kitchen smelled faintly of cedar and potting soil. The windows were open, letting in birdsong and the scent of Nancy's banana bread still sitting on the counter. Eli pulled a chair back from the table, sat down, and opened the envelope with a quiet rip. The letter was printed on heavyweight stock, the kind meant to impress or intimidate. Karen's name was stamped at the bottom in elaborate script, above her title, President, Rosehill Estates WA. He read through the first paragraph slowly, eyes narrowing at the list of alleged infractions. Disruption of community aesthetic, unauthorized horticultural structures, risk to property values. One line caught his attention. Lease terms may be subject to legal review. He set the letter down and leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling as if answers might drift down between the planks. A soft knock at the door broke his focus. Nancy stood on the porch, holding a jar of something golden and thick. "Brought you some peach preserves," she said. "Figured this morning needed sweetening." Eli opened the door and took the jar with a quiet thanks. She peered past him into the house. That from the HOA? Looks like it. Anything serious? He held up the paper. This looks more like theater than law. Nancy snorted. Karen's been playing community queen since she learned how to use clip art. They both stepped out onto the porch. The air had shifted slightly, still spring, but less gentle. The kind of change that didn't come from the weather. Nancy leaned on the railing, jar in one hand. You know, paper threats are funny things. My late husband always said they're like clouds. Loud, showy, and most of 'em blow away if you wait long enough. Eli nodded. Unless they hide lightning. She smiled. You're not wrong. After she left, Eli brought the jar inside and set it next to the bread. His eyes drifted to the envelope again. That phrase, lease terms, scratched at something old in his mind. A thought stirred. He made his way to the hallway, then climbed the stairs to the attic. The wood creaked beneath his boots as dust floated in golden shafts of light. He moved past boxes labeled Christmas and Tools, Dad, until he reached a chest that hadn't been opened in years. He ran his hand across the lid. It felt familiar and forgotten. Eli crouched, popped the latches, and lifted the lid. At the very bottom, beneath layers of yellowed tax receipts and brittle seed catalogs, he found a small box wrapped in twine. The words on top were faded but clear in his grandfather's handwriting. Eli stands in his attic, holding a dusty deed box labeled in his grandfather's handwriting. Hidden beneath old tax receipts and weathered seed catalogs, Eli found a legal folder thick with yellowing pages, and a lease agreement that changed everything. He sat back on his heels, staring down at the heavy folder, its label faded, barely legible. Edgewood Holdings 1986. The twine around it slipped loose with a dry snap, like a twig breaking in his hand. He unfolded the first sheet carefully, fingers tracing the brittle edge of the paper. It began plainly enough: land use agreement, temporary easement, developer access. But as his eyes scanned further down, they sharpened. Clause by clause, it unfolded in clean, neat language. A lease, signed between the original developers of Rosehill Estates and his grandfather, Robert Turner. It was written for 37 years. Eli blinked. That meant the lease had expired just last month. Always know what's under your feet, Eli, his grandfather had told him once, pounding a wooden stake into the edge of their field. Sometimes it ain't just dirt. He turned the last page, where the signatures curled like old vines, his grandfather's name in thick black ink, strong and proud, alongside two others he didn't recognize. Below them, stamped in red, were the words, non-renewable upon expiration without owner's consent. He let out a low breath and closed the folder slowly. Downstairs, the kettle clicked off automatically, and a thin whistle faded into silence. Eli walked to the kitchen with the folder tucked under his arm. The early afternoon sun slanted across the kitchen table, turning the wood pale and warm. He set the folder down and pulled out his phone. Steve picked up on the second ring. Eli, to what do I owe the honor? You got a few minutes? Eli asked. I think I found something. Oh, Steve said. Karen again? Worse, Eli replied, opening the folder again. Or better, depending on how you see it. As Eli explained what he'd found, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. You're telling me, Steve said slowly, you have a signed lease that covers all of Rosehill Estates? And it expired last month? That's what it looks like. Do me a favor, Steve said. Send me photos of every page. High res, no glare. Eli set to work scanning the papers with steady hands. Each page told the same story. His grandfather hadn't sold the land. He'd leased it, under strict, documented terms. And now, those homes, those manicured hedges and HOA meeting rooms, they all sat on land that was legally his. He heard Steve's email ding in the background. Okay, Steve said, I've got them. Let me cross-check a few statutes. While he waited, Eli stared out the window. The greenhouse shimmered faintly in the sun, quiet and unbothered. A bird landed on the roofline and tilted its head at him. 10 minutes later, Steve's voice returned, confident. Eli, this lease is airtight. It was never converted to ownership. You are, by every legal standard, the landlord of the entire subdivision. Eli leaned back in his chair. So what does that mean? It means, Steve replied, you could charge them rent. You could evict them. Or, he added gently, you could renegotiate under your terms. Eli sat with that thought for a long time. Finally, he nodded. "We're not here to punish," he murmured. "We're here to correct." Steve let out a short laugh. "You sound like your grandfather." That evening, Eli opened the cease and desist letter again and began drafting a reply. He kept the tone polite, firm. The final sentence was simple. "We should discuss who owns the land beneath your feet." He hit send. Karen's response didn't come through email, not directly. It came in another glossy HOA announcement, distributed by hand to every mailbox, printed with phrases like, "Urgent community alert," and "Property sovereignty under review." But the tone was different this time. Less authoritative, more anxious. The lines between command and plea had started to blur. Across town, in the Bellwood kitchen, Henry stood quietly in the doorway as his mother read and reread Eli's email. Her hands were shaking, and the color had drained from her face. She muttered something about lawyers, about betrayal, about misfiled deeds. Henry didn't say anything. He just watched. Later that evening, Nancy showed up at Eli's porch with a glass baking dish and a wry smile. "Lemon bars," she said, handing them over. "In case things go nuclear." Eli chuckled. "Thanks, Nancy." She studied his face for a moment. "You're not gloating." "Nope." "You're not angry." "Not anymore." She gave a soft nod. "Good, because you're winning." Inside, he placed the lemon bars on the counter, beside the peach preserves and the still-wrapped loaf of banana bread. His house was starting to look like the center of something. A quiet shift, a change in pressure. From the front room, his laptop pinged again. Another message from the HOA board, requesting clarification on his letter. Eli took a sip of coffee and walked over to the window, gazing out at the street that led into Rosehill Estates. Karen slams her iPad shut at her granite kitchen island, face pale. The HOA meeting had just begun when Eli Turner stepped into the clubhouse, a manila envelope in hand in the patience of a man holding all the cards. He moved with the quiet ease of someone who wasn't supposed to be there, but wasn't about to leave either. The room smelled of old carpet and lemon cleaner. Folding chairs scraped against the floor as residents shifted in their seats. At the front, a table draped with a faded Rosehill Estates HOA banner stood beneath buzzing fluorescent lights. A pitcher of lukewarm water sat untouched. Karen Bellwood was already mid-sentence. "And so we must insist that any unauthorized structures adjacent to the eastern perimeter be removed immediately to preserve both visual harmony and property values," she said, her voice clipped and official. She didn't notice him at first, not until the envelope hit the plastic tabletop with a soft thwap. A few heads turned, then more. Eli didn't speak right away. He simply stood there, one hand resting on the envelope. Karen froze, her mouth slightly open. "You might want to read this first," Eli said, his tone polite but grounded, like someone offering a flashlight to a person walking blindly toward a ditch. Karen's lips thinned. "Mr. Turner," she said, recovering quickly. "This is a private HOA board meeting." Eli met her gaze. "It concerns you, and everyone in this room." The envelope sat like a loaded trap between them. Karen hesitated, then flicked it open, pulling out the top page. Her eyes scanned the first few lines. Then again. Her mouth moved silently. She fumbled through the rest of the pages, as if the truth might hide somewhere in the middle. From the back row, Nancy's knitting needles clicked steadily, her red scarf growing slowly in her lap. The rhythm was soft but constant, like a clock counting down. Tom Harker, a normally quiet man with glasses that always slid down his nose, leaned over the papers now splayed across the table. He adjusted his glasses and read a few lines aloud, his voice careful. Lease term, 37 years. Expiration date, February 28, this year. Margaret, seated beside him, tilted her head. "Wait a minute, this says the HOA subdivision is on leased land?" Eli nodded once. "Leased by my grandfather, to the original developers. That lease expired last month." A pencil clattered to the floor on the far side of the room. No one moved to pick it up. Karen straightened, tried to recover. This must be some clerical misunderstanding. A technicality. "I assure you," Eli said calmly, "it's not. It's recorded with the county. I had my attorney verify it." Bill, another board member, frowned. "So, what does that mean, exactly?" "It means," Eli replied, folding his arms, "that this land belongs to me." Your homes are built on a lease that expired last month. A wave of murmurs rolled across the room. Some residents shifted in their seats. Others sat rigid, as if afraid the floor might vanish beneath them. A few leaned toward each other, whispering urgently. Karen's fingers tightened around the lease documents. Even if that's true, the HOA still has authority over community standards. Aesthetic guidelines, peace regulations. Eli glanced around the room. Authority based on what? If your organization was formed under the assumption the land was owned outright, and it wasn't, how much of what's been enforced is even valid? Tom cleared his throat, eyes still on the page. This lease isn't just a technicality. This undermines our charter. I'd recommend you consult your own counsel, Eli said, voice even. But facts are facts, and facts don't need approval. From the back of the room, a quiet voice cut through the murmuring. Is that true, Mom? All eyes turned. Henry stood just inside the doorway, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. He hadn't spoken all evening, hadn't made eye contact with anyone. But now, his gaze was locked on Karen. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Henry mutters from the back, is that true, Mom? And silence falls. By sunrise, gossip had bloomed like dandelions in Rosehill Estates, each porch buzzing with, did you hear what he said last night? The morning breeze carried more than just pollen. It wafted stories across fences, turned driveways into debate stages, and made mailboxes lean in as if eavesdropping. One neighbor's, he owns the whole thing? Was met by another's, well, Karen sure didn't mention that in the last newsletter. Lawnmowers paused mid-sputter. Bird feeders were refilled in silence. People weren't just talking, they were listening. Nancy's yard became an impromptu commons. She'd set up 2 folding tables and a battered silver coffee urn she insisted still worked fine, as long as you kicked it gently. The urn wheezed steam as residents gathered, mugs in hand, curiosity in their eyes. Eli arrived quietly, no clipboard, no announcement. Just a thermos, a steady gaze, and the same jeans he always wore on greenhouse days. He nodded to Nancy, who simply pointed him toward a lawn chair beside a tray of lemon pound cake and an old radio humming Willie Nelson under a shade tree. Tom Harker was already there, looking more confident than he had in months. Folks have been asking, he said, voice still soft but clearer than usual, what you plan to do now. Eli sipped from his thermos before answering. Not much, he said. Not if people want peace. I'm not looking to evict anybody. I'm just tired of being told I can't grow tomatoes on my own dirt. Margaret leaned forward, elbows on her knees. You mean to say, this HOA never had a right to fine us for wildflowers? Or mailbox color, Bill added, shaking his head. She made me repaint mine 3 times. There were nods, quiet murmurs of agreement. The air felt like something just before a summer storm, heavy, charged. Eli nodded toward the homes. This place could be better. Kinder. But it can't happen if one person decides everything. A silence fell for a beat, then Tom cleared his throat. Then maybe, he said, glancing around, maybe it's time we ask the question. What if we dissolved the HOA? Gasps. Not loud, but real. Heads turned. Even the wind paused. Nancy, still knitting that red scarf on the porch swing, didn't look up. About time someone said it, she murmured. Bill scratched the back of his neck. We'd need to organize. Figure out the steps. We start with trust, Eli said. And a little hospitality doesn't hurt. Nancy perked up. Spring picnic. Margaret raised an eyebrow. You serious? Potluck, Nancy said, sitting taller. 1 dish per street. Lemon pound cake. Deviled eggs. Maybe someone brings that spicy corn dip from 2 years ago. There was laughter. Light, cautious, but warm. Tom smiled. A picnic's not a bad start. That afternoon, a Bluetooth speaker played quietly from someone's porch, old country songs and soft gospel tracks. Front doors stayed open. Conversations bloomed like crocuses. As twilight settled, Eli returned home. A note was taped to his screen door. Left something for you. Beneath it, a black binder sat like a silent confession. He picked it up and flipped it open. Inside were years of HOA meeting notes, financial ledgers, and email printouts. Some pages had been marked with yellow tabs, highlighted notations, line items that didn't match budgets, and memos that never reached residents. On the front page, a sticky note in blocky handwriting read, She hid this. H. Henry. Eli sat down at the kitchen table, turning page after page. There were fines issued that never showed up in HOA statements. A landscaping project that charged twice for the same vendor. A memo that reduced elderly residents' landscaping exemptions without a vote. His fingers rested on a spreadsheet labeled Community Violations. Names, addresses, arbitrary dollar amounts. He closed the binder slowly, exhaled once, and reached for the phone. It rang twice. "There's something you might want to see," he said to Sheriff Dalton. The HOA clubhouse, once Karen's kingdom, now smelled faintly of lemon bars, old wood polish, and change. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle this time, not rows. Someone had pushed the lectern to the side, and a crockpot of mulled cider simmered on a back table. No one claimed the head seat. Instead, voices murmured in low, thoughtful tones, as if the very walls were listening. Eli sat near the middle, manila folders in his lap. He wasn't wearing anything different, same boots, same flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up. But the way people glanced his way, nodded without being prompted, it was clear something had shifted. He didn't ask for the room's attention. He had it. Karen entered 10 minutes late, clutching a branded HOA binder and a stack of papers. Her stride was brisk, her mouth tight. She didn't greet anyone. She moved to the front table like always, stacked her papers with practiced clicks, and cleared her throat. "This meeting," she began, "is hereby called to order." Tom Harker stood up before she could finish. "We're not here to be ordered." Karen blinked. "Excuse me?" Margaret rose as well. "We've reviewed the documents Eli shared. The lease, the binder, the spending logs. You weren't authorized to." Nancy's voice cut across the room, soft but sharp. "We were authorized by truth." A hush settled. Tom stepped forward, producing the binder Henry had left. "This has record of fees never disclosed. Petty fines. A contract signed with your cousin's landscaping company, twice." Karen's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the binder, but Tom didn't let go. "And," he continued, "it shows the HOA charter is legally expired, rendering everything we've done in the past month invalid." Karen's mouth opened, searching for a line that might still hold power. From the back row, Sheriff Dalton shifted in his seat. He said nothing, but his presence was like a stone on a shallow pond, still, heavy, undeniable. Karen laughed, but it rang hollow. "This is all dramatics. You people wouldn't even know how to run a cul-de-sac without me." Tom turned to the crowd. "Then let's find out." Margaret lifted her hand. Then Bill. Then Nancy. Then 2 hands in the back. Then 4, 10, 20. Some rose slowly, hesitantly. Others were firm, proud, deliberate. Karen stood frozen at the front. Her face moved through disbelief, then fury, then a kind of brittle realization. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "All of you." No one responded. Sheriff Dalton stood at last. He didn't raise his voice. "You no longer speak for this community." Karen's eyes flicked toward him, and for the first time, she didn't argue. She gathered her binder with shaking fingers and walked out the side door. It didn't slam. It just clicked shut. The room exhaled. Later that evening, as dusk folded over Rosehill, Nancy's lawn came alive. Folding chairs circled a fire pit, citronella candles flickered from jam jars, and soft voices passed back and forth like bowls of potato salad. A guitar strummed from somewhere near the porch, low, familiar chords of "Take Me Home, Country Roads." Children played tag under porch lights. A golden retriever ran across the lawn with a girl in pink sneakers chasing behind. Nancy sat beside Eli on a quilt, her red scarf wrapped loosely around her shoulders. "You didn't gloat," she said, watching the firelight dance in his eyes. "No need to," Eli said. "She did that part for me." Tom passed by, holding 2 mugs. "You earned this," he said, handing one to Eli. "Whatever comes next, we'll figure it out." Eli stood slowly, feeling the warmth of the mug seep into his fingers. He turned to the circle of neighbors, faces now unguarded, some hopeful, some still cautious. He cleared his throat gently. "I've got one more thing to say," he began. The music softened, conversations quieted. "Next month, you'll lease directly from me. No more HOA, just neighbors." As the sun rose over Edgewood Springs, Eli stood beside a freshly mounted wooden sign, hammer in hand. It read, "Welcome to Freedom Fields, a Karen-free community." The sign gleamed with fresh varnish, the letters carved deep and painted a warm green. Below the name, hand-painted tulips curled along the edges, Henry's quiet handiwork from the night before. A daffodil poked through the mulch nearby, as if nature had signed off on the message too. Eli took a step back, set the hammer on the grass, and let the morning sink in. It was quiet, but not empty. A good quiet. Porch doors creaked open one by one as neighbors strolled over, coffee mugs in hand, children darting ahead to examine the sign. Nancy arrived wrapped in her red scarf, a Tupperware container balanced in the crook of her arm. "You know," she said, eyes misty, "I joked once that we'd plant signs instead of rules." "Guess I wasn't wrong." Eli smiled. "You weren't wrong about much." Tom, Margaret, and Bill came next, no longer flanked by meeting minutes or neighborhood citations. They looked 10 years younger. Tom wore a hat embroidered with a faded tractor and handed out copies of the new lease agreements, 2 pages, clear print, no fine print hidden in margins. "Simple," he said, handing one to Margaret. "No bylaws, just land and trust." Margaret nodded. "Imagine that." Across the street, Karen's house sat still, its shutters closed. A for sale sign leaned at a weary angle in the front yard. No one walked past it. They didn't need to. The neighborhood had already turned its back, not out of cruelty, but quiet finality. By mid-morning, Eli walked to Morning Porch Cafe. The smell of bacon and biscuits curled through the screen door like an old friend. He waved at Dolores behind the counter and took a stool by the window, watching a pair of kids race their bikes down Maple Street without looking over their shoulders. Sheriff Dalton strolled in with a jug of lemonade in one hand and a lattice-top pie in the other. "Brought a peace offering," he said, "though I guess peace already arrived." "Looks like it," Eli said, nodding toward the cafe window. Later that day, the spring picnic bloomed like a second sunrise. Blankets unfurled across Nancy's lawn, folding tables groaned under the weight of crockpots, cornbread, deviled eggs, and casseroles that had won blue ribbons back in '86. Someone brought a World War II recipe for lemon pound cake. Children chalked hopscotch squares on the sidewalk while Henry quietly dug small holes at the park's edge, planting tulip bulbs one by one. As evening settled in, soft music drifted from a Bluetooth speaker tucked into a hanging planter. Fireflies blinked around the hedges. Neighbors clinked mason jars and passed around plates. Tom stood and cleared his throat. "We've had a lot of noise this year," he said, "but today feels like a song. We could have fought, we could have broken apart, but thanks to Eli, we rebuilt." He lifted a plastic cup. "To the man who gave us back more than land, he gave us space to be neighbors again." Eli nodded but didn't say much. He turned toward Nancy, who was fishing something from a picnic basket. "Here," she said, handing him a folded apron. "You're gonna need this." The apron was forest green with thick white stitching across the chest, roots run deep. He unfolded it slowly, smoothing the fabric in his lap. "Thank you," he said softly. She patted his arm. "You helped us grow again." A quiet hum of conversation swelled around them, laughter, shared recipes, the unmistakable creak of someone bringing out more chairs. As the fireflies began their dance and pie crusts flaked onto paper plates, Eli looked out at the gathering. Lanterns flickered, dogs padded between chairs. A teenager snapped a photo of her grandparents smiling beneath the new sign. "This land has always been ours, but now it finally feels like it." Sheriff Dalton leaned closer, voice just above the sound of distant guitar chords. "Karen filed a lawsuit last week in the next county. It was tossed out in under 10 minutes. On the edge of spring, the sidewalks of Freedom Fields cracked open, not with weeds, but with wildflowers, bold and free. Tiny blooms had taken root where pavement once pushed back. Golden California poppies shimmered in the morning light, purple coneflowers stood tall beside mailboxes, and daisies peeked out between bricks that had once bordered Karen Bellwood's approved plant zone. Now, nature followed no guidelines, and somehow, it looked just right. Eli stood in the greenhouse, the early sun stretching through the panes like warm fingers. He adjusted the irrigation valve, then bent to examine a cluster of young spinach leaves. The smell of damp soil and soft green growth brought a memory back, his grandfather, kneeling with him in the dirt behind the barn, pressing a single seed into the ground. Everything worth keeping grows slowly, the old man had whispered. Eli smiled at the thought, brushing a fleck of mulch from his arm. Later that morning, he walked the old path toward Nancy's porch. A fresh breeze carried the scent of honeysuckle and something baking, peach, maybe apple. Her red scarf hung from a peg by the door. On the porch swing, Nancy sat with a basket of yarn and her knitting needles, clicking rhythmically like crickets in the afternoon. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Roots Run Deep," she teased, nodding at the apron he wore like it was a medal. He grinned. "You should have stitched Most Improved Community Organizer." She chuckled. "Too many syllables." They shared coffee on the porch as children biked past without helmets or fear. A father jogged by with a golden retriever in tow. A mother pushed a stroller, humming softly. No one hurried, no one hid. Eli sipped slowly. "She's really gone?" Nancy nodded. "Moved out sometime last night. For sale signs been taken down too." He didn't ask where Karen had gone. It didn't matter. That afternoon, Eli visited the school garden near the edge of town. The gate creaked open and he saw Henry kneeling in the raised beds, surrounded by second graders holding tiny watering cans and oversized gloves. They giggled as he showed them how to space carrot seeds. His voice was soft, patient. Eli waited until the group moved toward the compost pile before walking up. Henry glanced over his shoulder and offered a small smile. "They think I'm some kind of carrot wizard," he said. "Keep the illusion alive," Eli replied. "That's half of adulthood anyway." Henry stood and brushed off his jeans. "Thanks," he said, after a pause. "For letting me stay. For not judging. You're planting," Eli said simply. "That's all I need to see." They shook hands. A quiet, firm thing. Nothing flashy. Later, back at home, Eli found a small brown envelope in his mailbox. No return address, no stamp. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. The handwriting slanted sharply. "You humiliated me. This was never about the land. It was about control, and you took it. I hope you're proud." No signature. But he didn't need one. He walked to the compost bin near the greenhouse and tucked the note under a layer of lemon rinds and shredded leaves. Everything decomposes in time. That evening, as fireflies blinked in the hedges and a soft guitar strummed across the lane, Eli returned to his porch. The swing creaked beneath him in its familiar arc. From across the street, he saw Nancy in her rocker, knitting a new pattern in lavender yarn. Down the block, someone had added a new detail to the mural at the old HOA gate: birds in flight, curling vines, and beneath it all, painted in careful strokes: "We grow together." Sheriff Dalton walked up the porch steps with 2 mugs of coffee. "Smells like honeysuckle and victory," he said. Eli chuckled. "You always this poetic?" "Only in retirement," Dalton replied, handing over a mug. "You did good, Eli." Eli nodded, lifting the cup in a quiet toast. "We all did." They sat in silence for a while. The kind of silence that didn't ask to be filled. As the sun dipped below the trees, streaking the sky with gold and plum, Eli leaned back, mug warm in his hands, and let the moment settle. "Still," he murmured, "nothing grows like peace." In the gentle hush that follows a hard season, the people of Freedom Fields found something deeper than victory. They found belonging. Where fear once lingered behind drawn curtains, now porch lights glowed late into the evening, and laughter replaced whispers. When rules are used to uplift, communities bloom, but when wielded for control, they wither from the root. Perhaps what truly protects a neighborhood isn't policy, but people willing to stand, to listen, and to grow together. Like wildflowers breaking through the sidewalk, justice finds its way, quiet, steady, and full of color.